Hello, and welcome to Regiments of Renown Skaven Edition. This video will be talking about what these Regiments of Renown do, what they provide over the basic variant, and what I would consider including them in my armies. This video will primarily pertain to the Domination game mode multiplayer, but can also be useful for land battles or campaign if that's your thing. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So, Clan Vulkn Tail Slashers, the upgraded version of the Clan Rats with Shields. As with all Regiments of Renown, they do provide rank 9 stats, which is quite nice for a Clan Rat, getting that extra leadership in particular, because as you know if you played Skaven, your front line doesn't tend to hold very long. Having that little bit of extra leadership can be quite nice. On top of that, they also provide flaming attacks as well as flame resistance. Those abilities don't come into play super often, primarily coming into play against high healing factions, particularly with the fire damage, or against things like Tzeentch or some high elf or Bretonnian units with that fire resistance. Fire resistance isn't super high on my list of priorities when I'm thinking about units, so that doesn't really play into my choices with this unit very often. But if I'm playing against Nurgle or Vampire Counts or a faction with a lot of healing, then that fire damage can be actually very helpful and can do a lot to cut down your opponent's front line much more quickly than if you didn't have it. That said, Skaven already have quite good tools for shooting through front line and bursting down your opponent, so healing isn't a huge threat for them. But overall, this unit is still quite nice, even just for the extra leadership, just to have a little bit more staying power in your front line without upgrading all the way to Storm Vermin. Next up, we have Eshin Triads, who are facing the wrong direction. Silly ratties. This is the upgraded version of the Eshin Triads, and the main ability they possess is this ability right here, Doppelgang. What this does is it spawns in a duplicate of this unit, which has looks exactly identical. As far as your opponent can tell, it is the same unit, but it doesn't actually deal any damage in melee. The cheeky thing with this ability is that your opponent actually can't see you using it if you're still in your stealth, which these guys are stealth stocked. They have stock. So if you're out of your opponent's line of sight, or they haven't spotted you yet, and you use this ability, they won't see it go off, and so then when they reveal the duplicate, they won't know that it's the duplicate. They have no way of telling if it's a duplicate or if it's a real one that they found, which can be very cheeky for distracting your opponent or just a little bit of disruption. If you can get it in the back line, it'll still tie down enemy range units to prevent them from firing. So it can be quite useful, though I find it to be a little bit cheeky, a little bit of a meme, but it's not bad. I don't know if I can justify taking this in any super competitive builds, however. Next up, we have the Vikstrin's Death Squads, the RoR Death Runners. The main ability these guys have over their normal brethren is Duck and Weave. Extra 10% speed, taking them up to about 60, 10 melee defense, taking them up to 46, and 10% physical resist, taking them up to 40. Only active when their leadership is higher than Wavering. So, also facing the wrong direction. You silly ratties. These guys are really good at chewing through armored infantry. Dwarves, Cathay, anything like that. They excel at that. They just dominate armored infantry in melee. Even elite tier stuff, they'll just chew through like it's butter. Their problem comes when they're facing low tier infantry or magic attacks. Magic attacks chewing through that physical resist. Even the 46 melee defense, they're very squishy, so they really need that physical resist. So against factions with a lot of magic damage, think the demons, think wood elves with their dryads, anything like that, I would definitely stay away from these guys. They're very squishy without the phys resist. But against, like I said, those heavier armor factions, they can actually be very effective. Next up, we have Blightscab's Plague Pack. Plague Monk Sensor Bearer RoR. Not a unit you see very often in Plague Monk Sensors or the RoR. The main ability they possess is Rabble Rouse, which provides ITP and a 35-meter aura. ITP can be really useful for Skaven. Again, as you know, Skaven don't have a whole lot of leadership. They tend to rout and run away very easily, doubly so when there's a big terror-causing monster. So this ability can be quite useful. That said, its range isn't exceptional. It's only about 35 meters, that's what you're saying. So it's only terribly useful if you're in a very tightly packed formation, which Skaven generally don't want to do. They want to be very spread out so they can protect their missiles. The only time these guys are terribly useful is if you're going for a Death Star kind of build, where you just have a bunch of tightly packed elite units and monsters, which hasn't been meta for Skaven for quite some time. So, unless you're going for that kind of build, these guys generally aren't going to pay for themselves or really provide a whole lot for you. Next up, we have the Council Guard. The Council Guard are a bit of a weird one. In Warhammer 2, and I suspect still in land battles, they were pretty much an auto-include. They're unbreakable Storm Vermin with Guardian. They were very good in the late stages of the fight, where most of your chaff had routed off, and it was just your characters on top of whatever chaff you had left, namely these guys. They made Skaven very, very strong in that stage of land battles, but with the advent of summoning and reinforcements in Domination, that stage of the fight doesn't really exist anymore. You don't need an unbreakable chaff unit when you can just summon in a new fresh chaff unit for a third of the price. So for 1300, their melee stats are pretty underwhelming. You're really just paying for that unbreakable, which I think is much, much less valuable to you in Domination these days. So in general in Domination, I find it hard to justify paying 1300 for these guys. Which is a shame. Cool unit. Next we have the Teeth Breakers, our Rattling Guns. So in addition to just having vastly superior missile strength to basic Rattling Guns, they also have Concealment Bombs. Concealment Bombs have been ability possessed by several Skaven units, and what it does is it allows you to have stock and unspottable for 73 seconds, and 3 uses, I believe? Yeah. As long as they're out of melee. I know a lot of people really like this unit. This ability can be really, really cheeky. Just giving your Rattling Guns time to reposition, as well as dropping any attack orders on them by going invisible, can be quite useful. Personally, I don't think the Concealment Bombs are that useful. They're a little gimmicky, but the extra missile strength is definitely worth it. Taking these guys just for their extra missile strength alone is oftentimes worth it, just because it's with Rattling Guns. Generally, the play is to net something with Howling Warp and shoot it to shit, so you want to be doing as much damage as possible as quickly as possible. So going for the cheaper rank 9 stats is actually really, really good. So, the ability is a little gimmicky, but the stats definitely pay for themselves. Next we have Natty Bubo Sharpshooters. Our Giselle, they have Stalk and Snipe both, so they can fire while being completely invisible to your opponent, which is a very, very strong ability for a missile unit of this caliber. They can oftentimes just delete or just assassinate a squishy unit or a caster without your opponent even noticing them, which can be very, very deadly. They also are bugged at the moment, where if you zoom out too far, you often won't be able to see their projectile trails at all, which combined with the fact that they are permanently invisible until you get close to them, means oftentimes your opponent won't even know that they're on the battlefield until it's too late. Generally, I like these guys either as my soldiers when I have missile superiority, just by default when I'm playing against a rush faction, something like Khorne or Slaanesh, maybe, or against a faction where this is my only missile unit, so I don't have to protect any missiles if I am rushing, which is pretty rare for Skaven these days. I don't like them in a gun line that much when I have 3 other Giselles, because if I'm trying to have a shootout with, say, Cathay, if I'm trying to outsnipe their Crane Gunners, their stock and snipe doesn't really help them that much, because your opponent's just going to shoot your other ones. So in order to actually get a whole lot of value out of their stock and snipe, they need to be in a position where they would be threatened. Whereas if you have a wide gun line, they aren't really being threatened that much, because they can just shoot something else. And they're perfectly happy to do so. And their stats aren't that much better to pay for it. You really are just paying for the stock and the snipe, which can be quite strong in the right context. Next up, we have a unit that needs no introduction. The Avalanche Mortars. If you've played Skaven, if you've played against Skaven, you probably know exactly what these bad boys do. They have a burst fire mortar attack, which can one-shot most infantry units from Bretonnian Peasants to Phoenix Guard. They are absolutely devastating. For 1500, they are a steal. They can be an absolute dominant force in the battlefield, and they cannot be ignored. If you want a mortar unit, especially with the nerfs to the basic mortars, these are ya boys. Like I said, each volley can one-shot an infantry unit. They can destroy an entire opponent's army if your opponent lets them fire, and it just generates so much aggro and forces your opponent into you very, very quickly. If you need ranged firepower, look no further. Next, we have the Pit Fighters of Hell's Deep. These bad boys are the RoR Rat Ogre, and they provide ITP as well as the Norskin Berserk trait. ITP on Rat Ogres is very, very good. If you've used Rat Ogres, you know they don't like to stick around and fight. They love to rout. They're nicknamed Rout Ogres for a reason. So having ITP on a Rat Ogre, your best source of mass to actually peel your backline against things like cavalry or monsters, is huge, because that's what they want to be doing. They want to be fighting those big terror-causing monsters for you and holding them in place. So having ITP is very, very valuable. They're worth taking for that alone, in my opinion. Berserker is a nice trait to add on top of that. It's just some extra melee stats, so they actually thrive in those fights that they are taking anyway. More Skitters Hellion. RoR Mutant Rat Ogre. These two abilities it possesses are, first of all, Zap. Anytime it makes melee contact with a unit, it increases its cooldowns. Very, very useful for gooning out things like casters or caster lords, or fighting those to keep their cooldowns from charging up so that they can't cast spells or use any abilities that might fuck you over. They also possess a little vortex ability to direct damage around them, which doesn't last very long. It's only 2-second duration. That said, it goes off consistently. It doesn't require manual activation. It's just going off every few seconds in melee combat. This guy, Mutant Radogers really suffer from their animations. They have a really hard time connecting in melee for whatever reason, as well as they tend to leap into enemy formations and just get themselves surrounded and killed. So it's kind of hard to justify investing so much money in a unit that's just very likely to fuck you over. So it's really hard to justify ever really bringing this guy, unfortunately. Which is a shame, because his Mutant Radogers are pretty cool. The Thing, RoR Help It. Compared to the basic one, he has poison attacks as well as fluid injection. Melee ability augment gives 20% weapon damage, 20% AP weapon damage, 24 melee attack, and rampage. This guy is just a massive anti-large duelist. If you need something to 1v1 a monster, this is your boy. And with the added melee attack steroid of fluid injection, he can actually tear apart big monsters pretty quickly. Not usually really the Skaven's playstyle. They tend to have other things to kill big monsters, namely these two boys, Rattling Guns and Jezzails. But if you need to take on a monster in melee, this guy is an excellent option to do that. Next, we have Ikit's Zap RoR Warp Lightning Cannon. These guys also have the Zap ability, though I find it much more useful on these than on more Skitter's Hellion. First of all, because they connect more often, but secondly, because they can apply that over a long range, which means you can pick your target and ideally focus the enemy caster. If you can get this just sitting on enemy caster the entire game, you can stall out their spell casting speed very, very heavily. Just preventing them from casting spells all game, they can really punish enemy large units, as well as having, you know, hefty anti-large bonus and more weapon missile strength than the basic one. So against a character like Malekith on a Dragon or Cetra on his War Sphinx, they can do a lot of work both in damage and in disruption of their abilities. So they're a very, very strong unit, and oftentimes when you see a Warp Lightning Cannon, it'll be these ones just for the missile strength alone. So the added benefit of Zap can be very, very nice in certain situations. Next we have the Dwarf Thing Menace, the RoR Doomflayers. So Doomflayers are not a unit you see very often. Their animations are kind of garbage, and these guys are no exception. They don't do a whole lot of damage, and their extra abilities of Armor Sundering and Fear are kind of redundant on the Skaven roster. Rat Ogres have Fear, and you're always going to have Rat Ogres in most fights. And then Armor Sundering, it's kind of nice if you're fighting, like, Cav, I guess. You know, help your spears do more damage, but these guys want to be fighting infantry, and you have so many tools to kill armored infantry. Globes, mortars, catapults. You're never really hurting for means to kill armored infantry as Skaven, so these guys are just kind of redundant, even if they were functioning well and actually did damage in melee, which Doomflayers just haven't really done for a very long time. Last but not least, we have the Wheels of Doom. The only thing, and I mean the only thing this guy has going for him, aside from the rank 9 stats, is about 100 extra missile strength. Which I just find to be the strangest thing for an RoR single-entity chariot to have more missile strength. You weren't really going to bring a Doom Wheel anyway most of the time. They're not a particularly good unit. Their melee is pretty underwhelming. They feel really slow. They feel really clunky. Their missile attack is fine, I guess. But if you wanted a powerhouse missile unit, I mean, you have so many other ones. Why would you bring this one? I guess it's mobile, but like, it's just, I don't see why you would ever bring this thing, to be honest. Like, these two units have just have not been in style for so long. They're just not very good. Unless you like the red color scheme, I guess. The red color scheme's kind of cool. You're into, I don't even know what clan's banner that is. But yeah, I don't see any real reason to bring the Wheels of Doom, unfortunately. Anyway, that is all the Skaven RoRs. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please leave a like, drop a comment if you have feedback at me. If there's something I missed, please let me know. I will be having more of these videos coming out soon. I won't be covering the Demons or any of the Game 3 factions until the 18th when they drop their new RoRs, and then we will be covering those, so look forward to that. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Peace.